Well, good afternoon, good night, and good evening, everyone. We're going to go ahead and begin our webinar today. Well, thank you for joining us here from Chesapeake, Virginia. And I'm going to go ahead and end our welcoming poll. And today we're going to be discussing unit test and debugging in version 7. So first of all, my name is Tyler Haynes. I'm the presenter today. I'm a sales engineer here at Decisions. And please feel free to reach out to us directly through LinkedIn or other sources. That we're open to having questions through LinkedIn or other sources. You can email us, or you can have anything you might want to do. You can chat with us on our website, have any questions you might have. And just to familiar with us with your Zoom panel, as I know probably since COVID-19 here, everybody's familiar with Zoom. But as you can see, please feel free to ask any questions in the chat feature or raise your hand. I do have some colleagues online today which will be able to answer any questions you might have. We have our Q&A. We can answer questions live on the demonstration or the webinar today. And of course, we have our polls. So please feel free to use those features and we'll be able to answer any questions you might have about unit tests or debugging today. So I just want to give you a high-level view of Decisions because I know that few you probably are familiar with Decisions, but there are people who are not familiar with Decisions. So I also want to give you that we are business process management software. Our tagline is automate everything. So we're a software that helps non-technical people easily automate and optimize business processes without the need of code. On this slide is some of our current customers in different sectors, so healthcare, financial services, other, and even government. We are equal parts rule engine and workflow, so there's a lot of different problems we can solve across different industries. So now I want to bring you up to some upcoming events we might have. So if you are a current customer, this is a very important, unique thing we just started. It's our Lunch and Learns. It happens every Monday through Thursday, 12 to 1. I'm hoping that some of you on the webinar who are current customers actually attended this before, but it actually is. You can get online during 12 to 1 Eastern Time, and Decisions experts will get on the line with you and answer your questions live. Could be a support ticket you've input, could be a question you might have about how to do something in Decisions. We will get online with you and be able to inform a Q&A and answer those questions live. Now, we do at Decision provide free training, which is a unique thing for either customers or non-customers that you can sign up for. So we do have our intermediate training that starts here at the end of this month, here in 5 days. Now, we do have limited spots for all these trainings, so please pre-register for these trainings. And of course, you see this is Eastern Standard Time. We do, over the current course of the year, provide training that is in all different time zones. So please be aware of those as you look for training. And we do recommend that we do training in staggered. So like you want to, before you do intermediate training, you want to make sure that you've actually done beginner training first. Now, as you can see right here, in August, we actually have beginner training starting at Eastern Standard Time. And then we also provide certifications. So we have associate certifications and professional certifications if you're interested in actually get certified in Decisions. So we do have professional certification beginning August 9th through the 13th. Of course, the prerequisite of that is to actually have your associate certification before that course. And of course, all these courses are free, but there are limited seats. So please reach out to Decisions and come to our website, or reach out to, if you have an account manager, a customer success manager, if you're a customer, please reach out to our support. Please reach out to those and they'll be able to get you registered for these events. So now I want to go over what we'll actually be covering here in our webinar today. So a quick review of the debugger and global debugger. So I'm really hoping today that a lot of you who are current Decision customers have been actually using the debugger before. But there's something new in 7. It's a global debugger. Global debugger is something we'll talk about here a little later. It's new to version 7 and allows you to debug all flows, all processes happening inside Decisions. And the goal of the debugger is help identify issues for a designer to resolve without having to put it in production in a graphical user interface to be able to actually debug the product, debug your flow, debug your rule without having to put it in production and be able to do it from the designer. So the next thing we'll talk about is unit tests. And unit tests are the ability to, excuse me one second, to test data that is tied to a specific flow or rule with an inherent capability. So if you have a sample unit test, you'll run this test. Okay, this data right here, I'm running this consistently. It'll send an email off, say when this unit test is complete, that can be automated for you. Now, sample data is the ability to test data usable across different flows and rules. So you create a data sample which is set across your entire organization. And you can test that sample data across different flows, different rules, while unit tests are specific to a specific lower rule flow. And it's a very important differentiation between those two that we'll make sure you understand today on our webinar, is that unit tests have the ability to be across just for a specific rule or flow, and data samples can be used across different flows and rules. And of course, the last thing we'll talk about is Decisions has a complete built-in logging solution with a profiler that we'll go into more detail here later. And then, of course, finally, we have any Q&A you might have. So now I want to be able to actually ask some pre-questions. So I'm going to pop another poll up here in a second. It's going to be poll, what is your favorite debugging feature, and have you used the profilers and logs? So I just want to get a sample set of what people today attending the webinar have actually used in their time with Decisions. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll right now. Please feel free to answer that poll as you get time. I'll have it up for the next few slides. So the next thing I want to go is and talk about the debugger. The one thing I want to do before now is I will be bouncing between the slides and Decisions as we go through each one of these agenda items. So please bear with me as I go between the presentation and Decisions. So the debugger right here is a interface you can use. Click a simple button and it actually brings a graphical user interface up that allows you to debug your flow without having to leave the designer. Go into the portal or actually run the flow. So as you can see right here, so far out of our answers on the debugging in the poll, 58% of people already like the debugger as the most popular thing they can do. It's a very visual development, use familiar flow elements, and all the data inside the actual form data, if you're passing in different items, is available. Now to show you how the debugger is used, let me go ahead and switch to Decisions. And right here is a simple purchase request flow I have already built today. Now, as you can see, this is version 7. So if anybody's familiar with version 7, or is this first time you've ever had version 7, it is a little different graphical unit interface than 6 or 5 or 4 or any other versions, but it does have the same features of a debug. So I'm going to simply click the debug button here. You can debug flow, run flow, or profile the flow. I'm going to debug this flow, and I'm going to start debugging this. Now, this is the graphical user interface. So as you can see here, I'm not running the flow in production. I'm in a complete debug mode, and it's actually running the flow. So you can see here my form popped up here. As you see here in this orange highlighted path I have right here, I'm actually highlighting what path the flow is taken in my process. So I'm going to simply input information to my form today. Now, as I do this, when I hit submit, you're going to notice that the orange path continues down to the end step and follows the process down the flow. It actually does, all in debug. I simply hit submit, and now you can see right here, it passes my weekday rule. My weekday rule is that today is Thursday, and the sent email step. And with inside the debugger, if you have any questions or issues, you can simply right-click on it, view the execution, and view the output data. If you click on each step right here, I can see, okay, right here is actually the rule that was run. It's actually start of the day is Thursday and results true. So the debugger allows you to create these type of debug the process or debug the flow without having to exit the studio, go into the portal, actually run the flow. And of course, now if you want to create a new session, you can create multiple sessions also. So I can create a new session and debug the process again. So and see that you can actually do multiple different processes, input different data, and keep it inside the same graphical interface to be able to do debugging, debugging, debugging. So before I go along, anybody on the panelists, is there any questions that have popped up about the debugger yet?
No, but you are completely right on about me needing a new coffee mug, so I do appreciate that.
Not a problem. So great. So since there's no questions about the debugger, I'm going to go ahead and stop the poll we have in process. And now we're going to move on to our second phase. Give me 1 second. So now, since there's no question about the debugger, we're going to move on to the second part, which is really unit test versus sample data. Oh, excuse me, I'm actually go to the global debugger. I'm sorry just for that. So the global debugger in 7. So this is something brand new to 7 because as anybody's used the debugger or going through the processes, Decisions, we did not have a way to test async cells or see really without going through the profiler what is going on in Decisions from a debug process. Now with version 7, we have a global debugger. Now we do recommend that you don't use it often. You don't use it in production, and you turn it off once you're done using it. So to show you how the global debugger works, let me go back into decisions. And right here's the same process I have here. And I'm going to go right here down to this little new icon right here that looks like a wrench with this. And see right here's my show global debugger. So right here you can group the things. You can preserve data for 5 minutes. And as you said, we also put this warning here that global debugger should not be used in production environment. Of course, I can simply turn this on. And now you see right here I have all the different processes I'm actually running. I have a scheduled test job right here that's actually running. It's a very simple test job that runs every 3 seconds. But as you can see right here, we're able to actually do all the different types of flows you're running. And to show you how this works, I'm going back to my studio. And that simple purchase request flow, I'm going to go ahead and run this again. So I'm going to simply say, and when I click submit and I go back into my global debugger, as you can see right here, that same purchase request flow here is showing up in the global debugger. And as you see, I have different flows I'm running through the entire process without having to go through. Now, the real advantage of this is if anybody here does async or fire and forget flows and they may have a problem with them or be able to debug them, what's going on with them. By using the global debugger for 5 minutes and testing that flow, you can actually see what the async flow is doing without having to change it to synchronous and do all that. It's all visible here within the global debugger.
And
Now,
if I could jump in too, one of the other great features about the global debugger is if you have processes that are running and you're unaware, you may have multiple people on the same instance running multiple processes, and you're curious what all is going on. This is also a great way to pop into that normal visual debugger you're used to using, but be able to see a holistic overview of every process that's running on the system, as well as these system generated ones, which are even things as simple as how many items are within a folder, how many tasks do I currently have assigned to X user. So a lot of those processes that ran in the background traditionally are now exposed through this.
thanks, Tim, and that is Tim Stahl. I don't know if you're most people in the call familiar with Tim Stahl. He's our director of pre-sales engineering here at Decisions. Thank you, Tim.
You
Sorry,
got it.
I want to mention who you were because I didn't know who you were. So now you can see right here, and I'll always recommend before you exit or you're done please turn it off because you don't want this taking up your system resources while it's proposing all flows. So before I move on, is there any questions about the actual global debugger before we move on to the next step?
We did have one question that came in, and I'll go ahead and read it off for everybody. They were asking if the session was recorded, and the session is recorded. It will be posted to our YouTube channel, as well as our decisions.com/videos, usually within the next day or so.
Great, thank you. So now we're going to talk about unit test versus sample data samples. Now I want to explain that they're used really not in conjunction, but used in a lot of different same types of function. A unit test is data that can be used over and over again. A data sample, but it's per flow, while a data sample can be used across the entire organization. That's a very distinct function. So as you can see right here, that data samples can be shared with other flows and rules, while unit tests cannot. Now, unit tests can evaluate the result of a flow or rule. A data sample can't. Can be used in a debugger, both can, both in the global debugger and the debugger. Okay, one thing about unit tests, if you're using export, import, deploy with a flow or rule, unit tests can go from deposit repository or different exports, imports. Data samples cannot. And can be used to design to highlight changes. This is a very important feature as you're designing here in decisions and you're making changes to rules, your flow, but you want to make sure you have consistent outcomes or consistent results. Using unit tests and data samples is very, very important to be able to accomplish that goal. So the first thing I want to talk about today is unit test. Unit tests have a couple different features. They probably sample data, can be run on demand, or a lot of people don't know this, that unit tests can be also scheduled. So by scheduling unit tests, that allows you to schedule the unit test that you can run a unit test overnight when you're having low impact. You can test on save. Every time you save your flow, save a rule, you can automatically off the unit test. or after you import it. And then after you actually do that, you can kick off a flow to notify you, the designer, the owner of the flow, and be able to design that. So just to show you how unit tests work, go back into the studio here. And I'm actually going to go down here to my approval table rule. So this is a truth table here we have here at decisions. Hopefully everybody's familiar with the truth table is a type of rule we have here. And I already have pre-built unit tests for this rule. So right here's my unit test. I can kick off from here, or I can go into debugger and kick these off. So right here's my piano unit test. And when I actually kick this off, you can see right here, my unit test actually has a result. It's piano, I'm the policy admin, the underwriters is a group, and Corey is the manager. So unit tests allow you to actually, without having to recreate the data every time, right here, it actually has the data right here. And of course, if you need to edit the data, you can simply edit the data right here and edit your policy application data right here. So it's a very simple function, be able to add it quickly and simple, be able to have data to be able to test a flow, test a rule over and over again without the we'll have to input your inputs, which is really hard to say, or be able to input data, have flow in there. It allows you to simply click a button and very easily be able to test the rule or flow. Now, the one question you might have is, how do you go there and make it automated where it can actually kick off and flow? We have to go into our actual settings. Into our system and settings, and you go down to our Designer Studio settings, and then we'll simply type in unit to search for it. And right here, you can see those options you had I showed you in the PowerPoint of you can set it to run daily after you save it and after import. And of course, then you can actually add the unit test and kick it off and notify, put the results to your IT department, your designer group, or the owner of the flow. So before I move past unit tests, is there any questions we might have about unit test?
We had one question come up that's asked if we could test flows that include forms to be completed. That is true. In this case, we're talking about the way this test is set up. You would have to design the rule such that it could evaluate how that form or how that flow completes. But absolutely, you could do that.
Thank you, Tim. So the next thing I want to talk about while we're in the workflows is be able to talk to you about different workflow options we have for debugging. And then I will come back to sample data. Give me 1 second. Too many screens open. Now I apologize for this. I forgot to talk about sample data. So inside of sample data, what a sample data is it's really simple, a report which has data in it. The report can be, like you see earlier, this report has the same features here, has the policy instrument equals this and the replacement cost equals this. And it has data that's inputted. So it could be string, guitar, could be the policy admin request, and that's actually run every time you make a change here and gives you the results. Of course, this count has 55 times of the different results in the sample data. And you can see right here how long it took to run. And of course, no match has no matches because it's just sample data that's randomly generalized. But this allows you to create a data set across multiple roles, multiple flows. It could be your normal policy application, could be your normal data that you might have come into your system that's coming from a third-party system. This allows you to create those sample data and use it across different flows or rules and see it here in the graphical interface, the ability to see, okay, what the outcome is, what the result is without having to go through and create each one of those unit tests. It allows you to have a large data set and then provide results on a large data set. And that's really the difference. Unit tests are for units. They also cannot be used across multiple flows or rules. They're really designed as a one-time run against that flow rule. Data samples are a large sample of data sampling that you can use across the complete such organization for different flows, for different rules. And that's really the difference between the two in that question. So before I move on, is there any questions between unit test and sample data? Because I know that's a concept that might be new to you or new to you that never use sample data. Because I saw right here that most people don't use sample data. So is there any questions we might have around sample data? Great, there's no questions. I'm gonna go ahead and move on and talk about the next thing we'll talk about today. The next thing to talk about is more debugging tools that you might not realize or might not use here in decisions. So subflows, as I showed you earlier, nested subflows and rules can be seen in a debugger. So if you have a subflow built in your flow, it can be seen in a debugger, unless it's asynced. But with version 7 of Global Debugger, it allows them to be seen. Data types. I don't know if y'all been building decisions. This is more of a best practice. If you use data types to pass data types, you don't have to pass a lot of input data between different subflows and flows. This makes more rules and more flows more readable and makes up the inputs and outputs a lot easier. Well, another feature we do have here in Decision is simulation mode. So a simulation mode says, okay, what behavior do I want in production, in a unit test, and debugger, and actually select that result and behavior in those three formats. So this allows you to be actually execute without actually working. So say you're calling to a third-party system that costs you money to call out to. Every time you hit this external API, so you don't want to do that in debugging. You don't want to do that in unit tests. You only want to do that when you're in production and actually running it. So that allows you to, in debugger, take a sample data back from that third-party API, which costs you money, and then be able to actually put that in here and be able, okay, simulate this is the behavior coming out. This is a great feature for all of y'all who maybe call it to a third-party system and validate data and actually cost you money. This will skip and mock results for database services and forms. And then, of course, we also do have error handling inside decisions. We have a log step that you can add to any flow that you can catch all the exceptions in the flow. This will build a log step and catch exceptions and it records all errors we might have here in decisions. So the next thing Tim, do you want to add anything to those?
I was just going to say with with the simulation mode, one of the things that we've added recently, past number of months, is the ability to see when the steps are in simulation mode. In the past, you could have steps in your flow that you could toggle simulation on, and you wouldn't necessarily know at a glance that it was. However, in the latest versions, we have put a little icon on it. Looks like a little S with a yellow circle around it. So you can see at a glance that you have things running in simulation. It's also a really good way to, if you have email steps, that you can say, in debugger, go ahead and use that simulation behavior. So that way it doesn't send someone an email and spam them as you're trying to test the system out. The other thing with logging that's great too is that you have complete control over not only the categories, so how you're going to filter your logs, but the entire contents of that log. You can do things like stack traces and all that normal stuff, but you can actually dump all of the, any of the data that's available to the flow up until that point in that log as well. So if you have data that you need to test or API returns or JSON or this, that, or the other that you need to check, based on that error, you can put that into the log, classify it appropriately from error or fatal all the way down to info, and also categorize that. So if you have multiple use cases on one server, then you can actually, tell the difference between the different logs that are in there.
Thank you, Tim. So let's go into the flow and show you the next step in the process.
And actually, I'm sorry, real quick, a question came in right as you were going to change. Since we're on this error handling and logging stuff, I want to answer. And it came in and said, where do we see the log from the error handling or system log? Can I customize it for easier filtering? And yes, so if you're within the Decision Studio, you simply go down to the system folder, administration, system tools, and log. In fact, he's got it right there. This is where it's going to write to by default. If you click on that real quick, what we'll see is that category there on the left. You can customize that for every single log step you use. So that way, that category is what you can then use to search on. It makes it very easy to filter it out. So if you give every part of your one use case, for example, flow one is the name of it, and the category is, maybe API calls or flow one and database calls, just as an example. That way you can quickly filter, search it, and know what that error log actually is for. Great question. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Tim, for stealing a little bit of my thunder. Because the next thing we're going to talk about is the profiler and logs. So one of the things I saw in the poll was that only about over half the people on this webinar today have never used a profiler, but will. Well, the profiler is a very unique tool. I am an old, I grew up as an SQL guy, so I compare it to the SQL profiler. That's how I grew up in the IT world. But as you can see, it's a profiler that allows you to see what flows of execution, database calls, flow steps, and any hotspots. And hotspots is the places where it might take a long time or something might be going on. So I'll simply X and show you how that actually works. I'm gonna go, you can actually click right here and show the profiler here, or like Tim said, you can go for System, Administrators, System Tools, and to the actual profiler. So right here, you can see my profiler, flow execution is 8, database calls are 206. Now what you can do, if you have a specific issue you're looking up, it might be here in SQL Server or something, you can always load a session, or you can start a new profile session. You can say, okay, I need to say this profile and save current, and click OK, and this shows you, okay, this is the sessions that just happened right here recently. So this is the profiler showing you what's going on very recently. Of course, you can stop profiling it. And I'm going to save my data. And then, of course, right over here, you have your different things. You can profile view summarized, but you can also go right here and look at your profile sessions. It shows you right here my profile session. And I can actually download the data also to be able to review it in a text view. So I'm going to open it here in a text view. And see here in the text view exactly what's calling the average time and what is actually taking the time. So this is a great way if you're actually going through a process that might be taking a long time. Could be calling to an external system, could be do something else that's just taking a long time. You can't figure out what is going on. Why is your flow working so slowly? So this is a great way to click the profiler on, run your flow, run the problem that you might have the problem with, then simply stop the session and go right here and actually see exactly what is going on in the actual complete flow or the profiler during that process. So you can see right here, it's a very easy way to be able to go into the system, be able to figure out what is going on without having to go, okay, contact your IT guys, go to SQL Profiler from Visual User Interface, here's our decisions, see what flow, what job, what is causing, what database call, what external system is causing the slowdown in your flow. So the next thing we'll talk about is logs. So Tim's already highlighted a little bit, and the question did too. So inside the log, we have 3 different functions. We have the event viewer, which shows you all the events that might happen, the log, which shows you each log, which showed you earlier, and flow management, the 3 topics I want to cover here today. So inside the event viewer, as you can see right here, I have no events. You can capture SQL calls. You can capture your API timings. Those might be API times calling in and out, and capture flow step timings. So it allows you to very easily capture all of that. You can look at your system activity. So here's all my system activity reported on every 30 seconds. Okay, I have 14 flow team stops. Actually, what's going on? So this is a really good way to get some graphical interfaces that you might have what is going on. You see every time the system's been upgraded. So if you have a question about, okay, it's been upgraded here. So I know a lot of people might have questions, okay, when did I upgrade all of that? Well, Decision stores all that for you. You can see every time it's been booted. So you can see I boot the system quite a bit often. If you have any questions going back, okay, when it was rebooted, all of that. So we have all of that and scheduled job logs. You see when the scheduled job was run. You can see right here when it's always run. So the logs provide you a lot in the event viewer, provide you a lot of different data, which allows you to go investigate stuff easily. If you have a problem going on, it allows you to go in here and say, okay, what is going on here? What can I do? And it allows you to come here in the event viewer and be able to see that. Same with logging. So the log, like I showed earlier, is just server logs and gives you what type might be. You might have a fatal error, it might be a warning error, whatever error you might have. So you can see right here, you can click on it. I have no actions I can do from it, but you can see exactly what the error is, and then go solve the error. And then with flow management right here, shows you all the flows you might have. Shows you recent flow runs, how many CPUs has been running. So all the flows I'm actually running here. You can see stored workflows. You can see the running flows. You also can see any integration activities you might have. So you can see right here, I have my sent email step, which is an integration activity I have going on. This could be a database call you need to review. So you see when it's happening and be able to see it from the graphical interface, what's going on, call external system, call the send email step, all those different steps you might have here in our flow management solution. So before I move on, is there any questions about system tools and logging? Because I know when I look at the poll right here, it's only used by about half the people. So if there's any questions about this, I'm feel free to dig into any more of these items we might have here today. Great. If there's no questions, I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next thing we'll talk about today. And now we'll talk a little bit about more best practices you might have at Decisions, because looking at our first poll, half of you have used Decisions, half of you have not used Decisions. One of the rules that we use internally is debug early and often. So that's one of the catchphrases we have internally when you're at professional services or within our sales engineering team is debug early and often. I will tell you this here at Decisions is something unique to the company that I really enjoy, is that every employee Decisions goes through training. So they do a couple, then they present to the organization. They actually build something in Decisions. So each one of them learn very quick from our president, CEO, all the way down to a sales rep. They all go into this training and they actually go through the process of actually building something here in Decisions. And one of the first things we tell them is debug early and often. The second thing is utilizing all the debugging tools, the simulation modes, all of those debugging tools we showed you here today, unit tests, data samples. Use those tools to make your life easier. Utilizing unit tests, sample data. Also, if you have any questions, please review our documentation site. I don't know how many you're aware. We do have a full documentation site, which you can see right here. This actually brings up to how to turn on the global debugger. But as you can see right here, with all different versions supported, from 5, 6, and 7, basically step by step and actually show you what happens. So simply it's documentation at decisions.com. Then simply review any questions you might have related to unit tests and debugging and any other questions you might have. The next thing to look at is contact our support with questions. We do have our Lunch and Learn available for current customers. They can log online, ask any questions they might want to have, or you can reach out to support at decisions.com. So now I want to open up to maybe any questions you might have. So are there any questions anyone might have around unit tests or debugging or anything else we can answer for you today?
Yeah, I had one that came up about editing data in a running flow, and I just sent a document over. But while if you needed to work with data in a currently running flow, Tyler brought up the flow management dashboard. And in there, you have two lists, one on the left and one on the right. The one on the left are the currently running flows. And if you select one of those, on the right, you can see the steps that are included in that flow and some details about them, how long they took to execute, et cetera. Now, with that, while the flow is running, you can actually right-click on that flow and you can modify the data within there, including reassign and all that right from there. In fact, you can end it like doing that, or if you just highlight the flow and on the left-hand or on the right-hand side there, like if you right-click right there, you'll actually get the where you can rerun it, you can edit the flow data. All of that's available right there. And again, if you go on our doc site and search flow management, we go into some pretty good detail on how that operates as well.
Thank you, Tim. And just so everybody knows, I've actually started our exit poll. And please fill out your responses because feedback is important to us here at Decisions to be able to better serve both our customers and prospective customers. So is there any more questions we might have today? Feel free to ask any questions, or if anybody wants some time back today, please feel free to leave our webinar because that is the last piece of the process. Any questions you might have. So if there's no questions, we'll stay online for the next 3 or 4 minutes to answer any questions you might think of, because I know this is a lot to intake during a 35, 45-minute session. But if there's any questions, we'll feel free to stay on the line and answer those questions. All right. Well, thank you, Tim, for answering all the questions.
You've got one question in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Chris Bugg is one of our director of sales here at Decisions, just so everybody knows what the voice they're hearing. So the question in the chat is when showing, okay, yep. So yeah, Tim answered that question. So I'm going to go ahead today and go ahead and answer some of the questions that Tim answered in the chat, just so everybody has a recording of it if you didn't hear it or heard it. So is there a way for the global debuggers running or left running? Yes, you need to go in Decision Studio and open the debugger and check its status. It will also tell you when to click the gear icon. So yes, that is a very, very important feature to make sure the global debugger is not running all the time. Can you test flows that include forms? Yes, you can. You can build a rule around how the flow needs to execute such that once you complete the flow, it can evaluate the outputs. So setting up the automated run keeps us out which unit tests. By default, it will run all unit tests, but you could create a scheduled job that runs specific tests. So if you have specific tests you want to run daily, you can create a scheduled job that kicks off the specific unit test. When you change the unit test, is it saved? Or when you run the second time, you have to redo the change. If you change it, you have the option to save the change. You can overwrite the test, or you can create a brand new test. So you can have multiple different unit tests. You also could not save the change. So if you make a quick change, run the unit test, and only change one value of 100 values you might have, just run a quick test. You can make that change, run the unit test, don't save the unit test change, and it reverts back to the previous unit test. Sorry, we were using sample data, not unit tests. I'm sorry about that. I was confused. Is there training documentation on best practice for error handling? Absolutely. Like I said earlier, we have a great documentation site. They can go and find more information about introducing to exception handling.
And actually, there are a number in the Q&A that I can go ahead and tackle if you'd like as well.
Absolutely, Tim. I'm sorry, I was going through the ones you already answered.
Oh, no worries, no worries at all. I'm going to start with, is there any way to use the debugger for a flow being called via API? So that is a great question. You would want to use the global debugger for that. Because if the flow is being called via an API, obviously, if you have to start the flow with that API calling it, you wouldn't be able to use the debugger within the workflow tool. However, you could use the debugger on that flow and simulate that API call. So if you have a payload that you're sending from your other system into decisions, you could use that. That would then kick off that flow in the standard debugger, and you'd be able to see that result. I got another one. Regarding your documentation, I've noticed you've been working hard on updating docs, and do you only do it for version 7, or where can I find the version 6? If you could pull up the doc site real quick, thank you, right there. If you look at the top of our document site, there is a drop down there. You can change to version 7, 6, or 5. Our release notes are there as well. And one thing I really like to point out, since we have this here, is the projects. And the projects are also little snippets and labs that you can search through and download into your local system. And they'll show you basic things on how to, like passing list items from window to window or creating dynamic forms. All this sort of stuff is in there.
And just so everybody knows, this is how I taught myself decisions, is using all these example labs and downloading these and seeing how to actually use decisions.
The other thing too, I have can I drop a file with the error or a net folder? You absolutely can. There are steps within the toolbox that will allow you to take the same data you're putting into that log, and you could dump that out to a file, dump it to a folder, wherever the application server has access. And the last one here, can we copy unit tests or create new ones that are based on the existing ones in order to write new test cases that are only slightly different than the existing ones? With our unit tests, they are tied specifically to the flow and are built out based on using them in the debugger. So the short answer to that is no. The long answer to that would be I would contact our support group at support@decisions.com, requesting that that's something you would like to see. If they may have a workaround that I'm not aware of, and if they don't, then your feedback is directly what we use to improve the product. So both of those things would be a great way to get that information to us. And based on that, Tyler, that are all of them.
Well, thank you all, everyone. If you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out. So thank you all for attending today. And if you have any more questions, please write to us at sales@decisions.com or at support@decisions.com, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. And we're signing off here from Chesapeake, Virginia. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.